Well, hello. Today's devotion is for Friday, November the 4th. And we're in Genesis chapter 49 as we're kind of winding down to the end of the book of Genesis. And in this chapter, we see that Israel is about to, he knows he's about to die. And he calls his 12 sons to his side. And I'm going to read just the first couple of verses, and then we're going to read verses 8 through 10 and verses 22 through 28. But let me read the first couple of verses to kind of introduce us to that. It says, "And Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father.'" And then he begins to go down the line, starting with Reuben, the oldest. And then he talks about Reuben, he talks about Simeon and Levi. And then he gets to Judah, verse 8. And I'll just start there, verses 8 through 10. "Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? The scepter," that's the king's scepter, "shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people." Now let's look at verses 22 through 28. He gets all the way down. And in verse 22, he says, Joseph is a fruitful bough by the well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him, but his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessing of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separated from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. So we didn't even go into all the other 10 or 9 brothers. We did talk about Benjamin. But the blessings of the father, the last words of their father. And, as we read this passage, you kind of try to put yourself there, and you just ask the obvious questions. Okay, what does this mean? He's mentioning that this is prophetic. Going back to what he said there in verse 1, he said, I want to tell you what shall befall you in the last days. So this is a prophetic word that he's speaking over his children, over their families, over their history that's going to come after he's gone. And so we look at it and we think, okay, what does this mean and how does it apply to us? Well, the first thing that really stands out is this whole going back to what, chapter 35, 36, whatever, has been about Joseph. It's been about Joseph and his dreams and getting sold into Egypt and all the stuff he had to go through, except for chapter 37 or 37, 38, that was dedicated to Judah and his adulterous relationship with his daughter-in-law, Tamar, who played the harlot. And we noted in that that was all in God's plan, because Paran, who was his son through Tamar, is in the lineage of Christ. And so that's why that little parenthesis right there in the middle of the story of Joseph is in there, because God wanted us to understand where the lineage of Jesus comes from. And so you would think now, after all of this narrative about Joseph, and that he would be the one whom the scepter would go through. And again, this echoes back to something we've talked about on a couple of different occasions: the seed of the woman in Genesis 3:15, the promised one, and we've seen how that was chosen through Abraham's son Isaac, and how he was miraculously conceived and spared and blessed. And we saw that God chose Jacob over Esau. The older should serve the younger, and so God was with Jacob, and he became Israel, the prince of God, instead of the supplanter. And so we've seen how God is orchestrating the seed of the woman to come through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now he's saying in this passage that we just read that the seed of the Messiah, the promised one, would come from not Joseph, but Judah. Judah, the one who sold Joseph into slavery. So there's an irony here. So just taking all that together, let's just take a minute and say, okay, well, how does this apply to us? Well, there's a lot going on, obviously, but just understanding that God is working behind the scenes always. Though we may not always see his hand, we can trust it's there. And we don't know why. Why did God choose Judah? We don't know why. And God's not obligated to tell us why. But he did reveal to us that he did in fact choose Judah, and that Jesus would come from the tribe of Judah. The Messiah is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so we think then about this passage, and let's just apply the specs then and see what application we can come up with to apply to our own lives now. Is there any sin for us to forsake? I don't see one that applies to us particularly. So let's go to promises. Is there a promise to claim? There's not really a promise that's made to us. He does make a promise to Judah that the scepter would not depart from his hand, that his brothers, the other tribes, would bow down to him, talking about the Messiah. But that doesn't necessarily apply to us either. Is there an example to follow or to learn from? Well, we talked more yesterday about Jacob blessing Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and the importance of leaving a legacy, of blessing our children and our children's children. But as we look at this passage, is there an example that we can learn from Jacob or Israel here? I don't really see anything specific. I don't see a command to obey. So then we ask the question, is there anything to be thankful for? Well, here we see then when we look at this text in its entirety, that God has revealed to Jacob. God has revealed to Jacob his plan. And I don't know about you, but this kind of reminds me of the story of Jesus, the account of Jesus turning the water into wine. Let me tell you why. You recall the story there in John's Gospel, that Jesus and his disciples went to the marriage supper at Cana. And after a period of time goes by, Mary calls Jesus, his mother calls Jesus and says, they're out of wine. And Jesus says, well, what's that have to do with me? And Mary didn't say anything to Jesus. All she said, she looked at the servants and said, listen, whatever he tells you to do, just do it. And so Jesus tells him to go and fill up the 6 stone water pots that were used for washing the travelers' feet. I mean, there were dirty foot water in the bottom of those things. So he says, fill them up with water. So they filled all 6 of those stone water pots up with water, and we're told that they held about 30 gallons of water apiece, so they're pretty good size. So it took several buckets full of water of them drawing them from the well and carrying it over there and filling it up. And then when it was full, Jesus said, go and draw a cup of that liquid out of those water pots and take it to the head of the feast. And so they did. They took it to the head of the feast. And the head of the feast takes one sip, and he calls the bridegroom over and says, what is this? He says, most of the time people serve the best wine first, and after everyone's had enough to drink, they serve the inferior wine. But you've saved the best till now. Here's my point. Master of feast had no idea where that wine came from, but the servants did. The servants who followed the command of Jesus were aware of what God did. They were aware of the miracle. They were part of the plan. And so as I think back, as I look now at Jacob, because he's been God's servant for all these years, this time he's 150 years old, whatever. And because he's walked with God all these years and been faithful to God all these years, God has allowed him to be able to understand God's program, what God's doing, God's purpose, God's plan. And I think the lesson and the thing that I'm thankful for as I look at this passage is that Jacob gathers his sons together and he blesses them. He blesses them by passing on to them the knowledge of what God has revealed to him about what God has in plan for them. And that's a blessing in several ways to me. Number one, I know that God has a plan for my life. And it's my prayer and my hope that as I continue to walk with him and be faithful to him, that he'll continue to reveal that plan to me. And that I will be able to be used for his glory. I'm thankful that God has a plan for my life. I'm thankful that God is willing to share those plans with me and use me. I don't know what those plans are all the time. I just try to be faithful where I know he's called me right now. But as I think of Judah here, we know Judah is a mess, right? We've already seen that. I mean, he marries a pagan woman, has 3 children. 2 of them are so wicked that God kills them. And then he goes in and sleeps with his daughter-in-law and has kids by her. So Judah's no saint. Judah's no great example even for us to follow. But there's another thing to be thankful for. The fact that God uses broken people. That God can use Joseph. That God can use Judah. The last one you expect out of the whole bunch. He's the one that sold Joseph into slavery. Yet that's the one that God chose to use to be the seed of Christ that would come through his line. Something to be thankful for. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a blessed day, and we will see you again on Monday. God bless.